Chapter 9, Icy Answers to Prayer. Before I dive in too deep, for those of you listening on Apple or someplace like that that's not showing the video, I want to point out that this episode is absolutely a video, not just audio, and that to follow it, you'll probably want to be on a platform like YouTube or Spotify so that you can see the images I'm going to show. Otherwise, it'll probably be really, really hard to follow. To drive this episode, I'd like to talk about the covers of the 3 paperback books. But before I jump off this picture on your screen, I'm going to eventually come to some discussion about this ice in my fire pit. This picture was taken of me a few weeks ago when I was thinking about doing this video. In the picture, you can see my hands in some odd situations, or rather positions. And what I'm going to ultimately do is talk about 2 ice sculptures that showed up in the ice there. Okay, to get us going, let's jump back and start with Dezsma. So here's the front cover at Dezsma, and on it you can see this nice roaring fire. And here's the original picture for the fire. Now what's interesting about this fire is that it was just taken at my friend's house. So I've mentioned Vince before. We were at Vince's house having a bonfire, roasting some food over the fire, having s'mores, whatever. And when you see the fire here, it's not humongous. But when Vince makes a bonfire, we jokingly say, you got to be able to see it from space. So when it starts, it's humongous. And by this point, it had burned down. But if you look carefully in the fire, you can still see that it's pretty hot. And I really wasn't being careful, and I had my boots pretty close to the fire, warming my feet, and I missed that the fire was still so hot that it melted the glue on my boots and made the soles flop off. And for those of you who read Dezsma, you recognize that as one of the scenes where Malum does that. The iron worker is sitting around the fire, and his hot fire melts away the soles of his shoes. That's actually something that happened to me at a fire from Vince. Actually, this very fire. So thanks, Vince. But back to the cover. What I wanted to do is take that picture of the fire and use a slightly enhanced color version. Here's that color version. And in it, you can see this nice little arc over where the word Dezsma would be. I guess for you, it's like this hand right over here. But pilot error or user error caused me to not be able to get that picture uploaded appropriately to Amazon. So when they post-processed it and created the image that they put up on their website, it looked really bad. I think I could probably do it now, but back then I just got frustrated and gave up and went to black and white. And that came through much better. What's interesting is that the black and white really helps with the next 2 pictures, the covers, because I think it made the set of covers more consistent. And actually, Rhonda and I were laughing last night about what we had considered doing for the cover before the fire was used. We were going to try to create an image of somebody holding a scroll to be like a picture of Kat from behind, like just the waist and down just a little bit so you could see it in her hand. We were going to use Rhonda as the model, but instead of a scroll, we were going to just have like this brown wrapping paper here. Imagine that. And then the square isn't quite right because we need something that would be vertical for the book. So it'd be, more like this, or we were actually thinking more of a tight crop. So here you see that. And because I was still struggling with color, I probably would have gone with black and white. So there you go. You be the judge. Oh, there's this other part about fire that makes it a much better cover for Dezsma. Rhonda doesn't like spoilers, so I won't tell you what that is, but definitely fire is a better cover than what that gladiator photo would have been. A couple of quick things I want to point out about the cover is that on every cover, you'll see some characters that don't make sense. Those characters are actually an encoding, and they're homage to when I worked at OCLC, and kind of a shout out to Vince again. So when I worked at OCLC, we owned a company called Forest Press, and Forest Press owned the Dewey Decimal System. What's cool about the Dewey Decimal System, at least at the time when I was working at OCLC, was that we had access to the raw text behind those classifications, and Vince helped me build this system where we could automatically classify electronic documents based on the Dewey Decimal System. This was way before any of this AI stuff. We were writing about it back in 1999. So that was pretty cool. So thanks, Vince. Shout out to you. That was a lot of fun. During the summer, when I first started writing Dezsma, I actually took some time to write some code that would let me take a string and encode it, or take an encoded string and decode it. If you knew that algorithm, then you could take that string and put it in and see that it means something. More importantly, inside the books, where there are these extracts that are supposed to be like recordings of the God figures meeting and things like that, at the beginning of those, there's also this encoding, and those encodings are meant to be like a subject like the Dewey Decimal System that would help you shelve them in a library. And those are just a shout out to OCLC and librarians, and I guess in this case, to also Vince who helped me build this really cool project named Mantis, where we were using the Dewey Decimal System. To understand and lay out the two covers for Bolmek and Verdekt, what I want to do is show you where the pictures came from, the thing that created the pictures for them. As I mentioned before, this picture was taken a couple weeks ago when I was thinking about doing this episode. And I've put my two hands close to where there were these two ice sculptures that appeared one day back in 2021. To explain what happens in my backyard, I keep my copper fire pit almost like a water gauge and let it fill up with water, and then look out at it most mornings and then empty it as the water fills into it. And over the winter, in Ohio, it gets hot and cold and it'll freeze if it gets cold enough. And then when it gets thaws a little bit, I'll go dump the ice out, the icy water out or whatnot. So I have a habit of just looking out at the fire pit in the morning when I open up the curtains. And one morning in 2021, it was like the last day of winter. I think it was the 20th of March. We looked out the window and there was this picture, this ice sculpture in the fire pit. And the ice wasn't super solid. You could actually see some fluid underneath there. But here's the picture that I think this is one of the first pictures I took. And what caught my eye was the picture of what looks like a person there. Here, let me highlight it. See how that kind of looks like a person? And then there was another sculpture off to the right that was a big tower. And I was so focused on the person at first that I missed the tower. And so these ice things are actually what led to the title of this episode. So to put it in context why this little blob of ice meant so much to me was the night before I had been praying about what to do about this second or third books and just in general, because we had just finished Dezsma in January and published it, and just starting the process of thinking about this second book or working on it. And just, should I really keep going? And I was struggling with that a little bit and praying about, what should I really do? Am I going forward with it because I want to do it? Is it something that God wants me to do? And just really put that before the Lord. And when I got up the next morning and went outside, before I went outside, I looked out the window and here are these ice sculptures in his picture. It looks like a person. It's like, please, come on over here. Like, I don't know if I thought this at the time, but almost like when Paul had the vision of people in a foreign land saying, hey, come over here and speak to us. It was kind of like, come on, write the book. It is how I saw that picture. And here's another view of that person, if you will, in the ice, where I'm underneath the tower, looking back towards that person, and you can kind of see like, hey, come over here in that image. So most of you who are watching this have probably prayed at some point in your life. And have you ever experienced that feeling that your prayers weren't getting very far, or it's just, hitting a ceiling and coming back to you, or God was, turning a cold shoulder towards you? If we're all honest, I think we'd all say we've experienced that. And so this idea that sometimes our prayers get cold answers, I think a lot of people can relate to. But that's not the primary purpose of the title for how I want to talk about it. I actually had icy answers to prayer because I viewed this sculpture in the fire pit as an answer to my prayer of, should I really go on? Is it just me, or should we do it? And to me, I really felt like those were an answer to prayer. Now, I know that there's probably some physical reason why, as some debris in the water or something that causes some sculpture to come up. But it's weird that the sculpture came up and looks like a person. And at the same time, the other tower, here, let me show you a picture of it, came up at the same time, and it's radically different. So like the person is solid and the tower has these like triangles that formed layer by layer, which creates that nice ribbed look. And then also, if you look carefully, there's water flowing out the tower coming out of the top. And so two very different sculptures. The following morning after I was praying about, should I really do a trilogy? Is it just me? Should we, do it? It just felt like, yeah, here, do them both. So it just makes me wonder, how often does God answer prayers in an icy way? I mean, in crazy ice sculptures in fire pits, where you had something you prayed for and God surprised you with his answer, or you missed his answer maybe because he was creating sculptures where you weren't looking for them. When I talked about this just briefly over Christmas, getting ready, even back then starting to think about the podcast the episode that might, be about the covers. I was showing the picture to someone who hadn't seen them before, and they mentioned, they quickly said, but you have to be looking for them, or you have to be open to them, that kind of thing. And he had a great point. I could have easily missed those when I go and open the curtains in the morning and just shrugged it off. But they caught my eye, and I looked and I thought about it, and I chose to view them as an answer to prayer. And then those two images become part of the cover art for the second and third books. So let's go back to the cover art, because that's the primary purpose in some ways of this episode. And here is the person. And at first, the person-like image really caught my eye more than the tower. And the person became something that I used for the third book. And here's the original picture that I used for the book. And I'm looking back up towards the sun. And so here's an enhanced version that has the yellow emphasized. But because we're doing black and white, here's a black and white version. And then when I was looking at this image, I really wanted to, in the third book, there's this emphasis on being hidden in Christ, or being in the book's parlance, being hidden in Teleos. And what does that mean, and how does that help the characters? And so I wanted to treat the bubbles that you see in the ice sculpture as those being hidden in the character. Turns out that I couldn't make the image work that way exactly, but I still wanted to use the ice sculpture. So what I did was I flipped the image upside down, and then I zoomed in. And so here's the part of the quote person that was used on the cover of Verdekt. And to me, that now looks otherworldly, as if those bubbles or essences of the characters are flowing between the worlds or something. And so there's a couple of points in the story where you can kind of try to apply that, but it's a stretch. Or you can just say, I just liked it because it was the ice sculpture and that it kind of matched the other styles. So let me show you how the ice sculpture became Bolmek. And it's a little bit of a spoiler, and Rhonda hates this, so I'm just going to put it in right here. But it's kind of hard to not give this away just a little bit. This picture is actually something that's meant to reflect like something tumbling down the throat of a monster. But if you think about it, or you glance at it, you can start to see these like pebbles of things flowing down into the esophagus. And that's kind of the picture that we were going for. So here's a couple pictures. And the idea of Bolmek was to look down through the ice sculpture through the water. And here is the original picture looking down through the water. And then I just stylized it to black and white. And then because the book cover needs to be different orientation than just rotated it. So there's the cover. And what's cool about this is how part of the lining of what would be the throat lines up almost directly with the And that was not done like on purpose. As we were scaling the picture and creating the cover, it lined up there. And I was just noting that when I was talking with Drake, and I go, isn't that interesting that the thing that was the original for this, taking it back in March of 2021, and we didn't use it for years, but yet it lined up really well with the title. We had no idea we were writing that book and what the title would be. And I go, isn't that really cool? Nobody even knew the title of the book. And I barely got it out of my mouth, and Drake goes, deadpanning. Somebody did. Someone did. Meaning God did. That picture of things tumbling down through a monster's throat was in an ice sculpture in my backyard the day after I prayed, should I write another book? And that became the title, the cover of Bolmek, before we knew it was going to be called Bolmek. And that's why Drake could say, somebody did. Like the sculpture was crafted, arced in a way that allowed that seam in what was like the esophagus to match the How cool is that? Talk about an icy answer to prayer. If that's an icy answer to prayer, I hope we all have icy answers to prayer. And as you're thinking about it, I hope one of your own is coming to mind, and that you take the time to share it with someone. I think there are lots of stories like that, and we just don't take the time to share them. Okay, so as if that's not enough, here is an original photo of another ice sculpture after I had been praying and thinking about what to do. And by the way, this was the only other time an ice sculpture like this appeared. To me, when I saw it, it looked like a person. And if you zoom in here, you can see what looks like eyes and a nose and a mouth. And once you glance at that, it's hard not to see that again. So that became the original picture that we turned into in black and white. that we then stylized and cut down and is the cover of the podcast. To me, it's kind of like, here's one more person. What are we going to do to help that one more person? Or something like that. And so I just wanted to use it because it was another icy answer to prayer. Hopefully now when you see just that blank podcast picture, you'll see that person and it'll come to mind like it always does for me. When I told my family that I was getting ready to do this episode, I said, hey, what's an icy answer to your prayer to one of your prayers that you have? And my wife immediately listed something that I've heard her talk about several times. Drake immediately answered with something that's pretty cool, a very specific answer to prayer. And Ron, my father-in-law, immediately brought up something that he wrote about in one of the books that I had read recently. And they're really cool stories. So if you ask someone, what's a crazy answer to prayer? What's an icy answer to prayer that you got? What's an icy answer to prayer in a fire pit that you've got? I think you'll get some answers. So ask or share your own. The stories abound. God still works. God is still working all the time. And maybe, in addition to the podcast, that the previous one right before this, where, he's working in dreams and visions, maybe, just maybe, he's providing some really cool, icy answers to prayer.